Hello everyone. In this tutorial, we will discuss about Active Directory. The tutorial is divided into three parts. In this part, we will discuss about the overview of Active Directory domain services, in which we will cover about the protocol used by Active Directory domain services, what is authentication, what is authorization, why to deploy Active Directory domain services, centralized network management, requirement for installing Active Directory domain services, and concluding we will see the overview for the Active Directory domain services and domain name services, that is DNS. The protocol used by Active Directory Domain Services is Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. The Lightweight Directory Access Protocol is an open vendor neutral industry standard application protocol for accessing and maintaining distributed directory information services over an Internet Protocol network, that is IP network. Directory services play an important role in developing intranet and internet applications by allowing the sharing of information about users, systems, networks, services, and applications throughout the network. As examples, directory services may provide any organized set of records, often with a hierarchical structure such as corporate email directory. Next come authentication. Authentication is a process of verifying a user's identity on a network. Authentication includes two components. The first comes the interactive login, which grants an access to the local computer. Second comes network authentication, which grants access to the network resources. A passport is a good analogy for authentication. It is a means by which a user can verify who they are. The most common way for user to authenticate is by providing a username and password. However, some computer systems also support authentication based on smart cards, one-time password, that is OTP, or biometric information such as fingerprint scans. A passport is a good analogy for authentication. It is a mean by which a user can verify their identity. Next is authorization. Authorization is a process of verifying that an authenticated user has permission to perform an action. Security principals are issued security identifiers when the account is created. So, some of the types of attributes that might be contained in the security tokens are user group, ownership, and admin privileges. User accounts are issued security tokens during authentication. So the security identifier attribute is unique for each user or a security group and is a primary mean by which the security principal is identified when trying to access network resources. Shared resources on a network includes access control list that defines who can access the resources. So, authorization happens very frequently and unobtrusively whenever user requests services like opening their home folder, reading writing files, or when requesting access to a Active Directory domain services aware application. The user only sees the result of the authorization they are granted or denied access. Security token is compared against the discretionary access control list DACL. So, an access control list is a list of access control entries. Each access control entries in an access list identifies a security principal and the access rights allowed, denied, or audited for that principal. The security descriptor for a securable object can contain two type of access list. One is discretionary access list DACL and another is SACL. A discretionary access control list DACL identifies the security principal that are allowed or denied access to an object. When a person or a process tries to access an object, the system checks the access control entries in the object DACL to determine whether to grant access to it or not. So let's assume if the object does not have a DACL. In this case, the system grants full access to the everyone. If it doesn't have any DSCL discretionary access list, then the system will grant a full access to each and every one. So if the object DSCL has no access control entries, the system denies all attempts to access the object because the DSL does not allow any access right by default. Why to deploy Active Directory domain services? Active Directory domain services provide a centralized system for managing users, computers, and other resources on a network. The feature of Active Directory domain services includes centralized directory, single sign-on access, integrated security, scalability, common management interface. Centralized network management. Active Directory domain services centralizes network management by providing single location and set of tools for managing user and group accounts. Single location for assigning access to shared network resources. Directory services for Active Directory domain services enabled application. Options for configuring security policies that apply to all users and computers. Group policies to manage user desktop and security settings. What are the requirements for installing Active Directory domain services? The objects are being defined on the screen for your reference. The first is TCP/IP, configures appropriate TCP/IP and DNS server addresses. The next come credentials. If this object is used to install a new Active Directory domain service forest, you need to be a local administrator on the server. To install an additional domain controller in an existing domain, you need to be a member of the domain admin group. Guys, over here, when I talk about the forest, domain, and all this, over here in this particular place, we are only overviewing the requirement for installing ADDS. These all terms will be coming in our next tutorials, which is especially on the Active Directory domain services, physical components, and the logical components. In those tutorials, we will have a better and deep understanding on all these terminologies. The last come domain name system. Verify that the DNS infrastructure is in place when you install Active Directory domain services. Whenever you are installing Active Directory domain services, you should verify that the DNS infrastructure is in place, or else you can include DNS server installation if it is needed. So when you create a new domain, a DNS delegation is created automatically during the installation process. When we will be doing a hands-on lab, at that time we will see how the DNS delegation is created automatically. Creating a DNS delegation requires credentials that have permission to update the parent DNS zone. What is parent DNS zone? In the coming tutorial, we will be we will have an overview on that as well. Moving on, overview of Active Directory domain services and DNS. So Active Directory domain services requires a DNS infrastructure. Active Directory domain services domain name must be DNS domain name. Active Directory domain services domain controller records must be registered in DNS to enable other domain controllers and client computers to locate the domain controllers. DNS zone can be stored in Active Directory domain services as Active Directory integrated zone. Component overview. Active Directory domain services is composed of both physical and logical component. First, let's see about the physical component. The physical components are data store, domain controller, global catalog server, read-only domain controller, RODC. Data store stores the Active Directory domain services information. This is the file on each domain controller. Domain controller server and read-only domain controller RODC contains a copy of Active Directory domain services database. When we talk about the global catalog server, it hosts the global catalog, which is a partial read-only copy of all the domain naming context in the forest. A global catalog speeds up searches for objects that might be attached to other domain controller in the forest. About the physical components, we have an entire one part of the tutorial in which we will have a detailed discussion on the physical components itself, and we have another part of tutorial where we will be having a detailed discussion of logical components. Just over here we are going through a definition of the physical components: data store, domain controller, what is global catalog server. Let's come to the logical component. First comes the partition. Various partition exist in Active Directory domain services, domain directory, configuration directory, schema directory, global catalog, application directory. Schema. It defines the list of attributes which all objects in the Active Directory domain services can have. Next comes domain. It is a logical administrative boundary for users and computers. Domain tree is a collection of domain controllers that share a common root domain. Forest is a collection of domain that shares a common Active Directory domain services. Sites. It is a collection of user group computers as defined by their physical locations. Useful in planning administrative tasks such as the application of the Active Directory domain services. Organizational units organizes the element found at a given site or a domain for the purposes of securing them more selectively. So that's all guys about the Active Directory domain services. In the next two tutorials, we will discuss about the Active Directory domain services physical components and Active Directory domain services logical components respectively. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe now and share with your friends. Thanks and see you in the next tutorial.